Hey up, and welcome back to the channel. This time we have got ourselves a bona fide, genuine restoration. This watch is completely and utterly dead, and if you look, it's got a fantastically cracked crystal also. I don't quite know what's happened to it. It was just an eBay find, if you will, and it is a complete and utter non-starter. This watch is a Seiko 5, and it's 100% automatic. There is no manual wind on it whatsoever. And if you look, it's got a fantastic date and day complication also. Specifically, the day has got 2 languages on it, as indeed is the way with the Seiko 5. We'll get into the history of the Seiko 5 in a little bit of time. Now you'll see the handles do go around quite well, and you can feel there is indeed a weight inside, a counterweight, if you will, counterbalance. So you know that it is, it's got the parts there. It might work, but it's just not running for us. And you can see it is indeed well worn. We've got the plating gone on the bracelet all the way around. It's got this lovely stainless bracelet on, even though it's fantastically loose. And there you can see the serial number for the Seiko printed onto the back. Now, tracing this serial number using one of those online converters, if you will, it was made in February 1982. So that's just about when Argentina started playing around nearby the Falklands, and I think it was around about the time that Margaret Thatcher's son got lost in the Paris-Dakar rally. So this watch has indeed seen some time. So at the time of recording this video, it'd make it 41 years old, which I think's great. It's lasted this long, and there you can see there's that bracelet, and you can see the wear in between the lugs. It really is loose. But regardless of the bracelet, let's have a look inside this watch. Now, as ever, I'm going to try with the old balloon, deflated as is, try and get the back open. And in this instance, I was quite lucky. It did indeed just unscrew. And now let's have a look inside this watch and see what horrors we've got awaiting us. And straight away, look at that. That's that counterweight, and you can see it must have had moisture inside at some point because it started reacting and creating these awful crystalline salts on the surface. Now, because it's green, it says to me it could be copper, which means that might be a plated part, and it's just started corroding. And you can see I'm just touching the balance wheel there a little bit, just to try and see if it moves. And indeed it moves, and it moves freely. But the first port of call to try and get the workings out of this watch is to remove that winder stem. Now on these Seikos, it's just got that nice little divot, as indeed is the same with any sort of nice watch. I really don't like those screws because it becomes a pain in the ass to try and disassemble them. Now with this Seiko, it's quite easy to get the workings out of the actual watch chassis itself. It's just a case of prying it out, and there's no screws or anything, and that is it. That's the old girl out there. Now, as well as that counterweight being all corroded and what have you, I also noticed there was a screw missing, but I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit further detail. First things first is to try and get these watch hands off. Look at that face. It really is looking rather worse for wear, and to be honest with you, I don't really know what I'm going to do with this. But the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed a mild issue already. So on the front of the watch it says automatic 21 joules. There you go. But on the back of the watch it says 6809, which would indeed be a 21 joule movement. But when we open the watch up, I don't know if you noticed on the counterbalance, it said 6309A, which is not a 21 joule movement, it is a 17 joule movement from a later watch. So this might have had replacement parts, or it might have had a replacement works. I don't know. Either way, it's a little bit of Frankenstein's monster. But it's history, it all works together, and herein lies the first potential error. So it turns out that plastic part around about the outside was actually only glued to that face. Normally with faces, as I'm sure you know yourselves, there is just a screw on either side, and undoing it the face removes. Now this face was particularly loose, so I thought, I wonder if it's just the screws have fallen out and it'll just pry up. I think it was actually glued to that disc. If it was, the glue was incredibly weak and it was still quite jelly. But opening it up, and regardless of that, we can look at it later. So here we are, we're opened up. And we've got this nice little C-ring and engager safety squints because they go flying, thusly. And that is all that is holding that day of the week wheel on. Now, they have the Eastern days of the week, and I believe, and I'd love to be corrected if I was wrong, I believe those are also Western letters from Asia, because I believe these watches are incredibly popular in the Asian countries. So here we're just going in. We've got this pair of plates. I don't suppose you'd call them bridges because they're not actually holding anything, but there's a pair of plates. And if you've noticed, that day of the month wheel has got a load of teeth around it, and these plates actually cover the teeth. So for me, they're actually retaining that day of the month wheel. And there you can see we've got it, I suppose you'd call it almost like a click spring, which actually idents inside the groove left by that day of the month wheel. And that's what actually causes it to fall into the right position. So with those two plates removed and that spring removed, that day of the month wheel can come off. And now we're on to these works here. These works are what actually operate that day of the month wheel and the day of the week wheel. And again, the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice these are made out of plastic. I say they're plastic, I don't know they're plastic, but they're certainly either plastic or resin. And to be honest with you, that makes me bloody nervous, because all of these watches I've worked on in the past and seen in the past, they're all brass or aluminium or even steel in some cases. But no, these are some sort of plastic or resin, so I'm going to have to be doubly careful with these. And it also makes me wonder why they would choose to make those parts. As I say, this was made in 1982. I believe it was late 70s through to the early 80s that these were made. So the technology was there to make these out of another material, but I suppose the technology was also there to make them out of a cheaper material, which is why it may have been chose. So now what I'm doing is I'm removing this arm here. I don't know if you noticed, but when you adjust the day of the week versus the day of the month, you spin it clockwise, say, for the day of the week, and then anti-clockwise for the day of the month. And they both advance in opposite directions. It's quite a fascinating mechanism, and I assure you, I will display how that works a little bit later on in the video. That component there I've just removed was also a part of that, and that had an inbuilt spring. Now you see here the screw I'm taking out is to take out what is a dual purpose device. If you look, it covers the yoke spring, and what this does is it sets an indent for the 3 positions of the crown. So obviously you pull it out one click, you pull it out a second click, and that will do the day of the week, day of the month, and that will also set the time on the second click. The third position is obviously all the way in. So that's what the little indents are on that. What I'm doing here is I'm utilising a screwdriver to try and take this yoke spring off of the keyless works. Now, one thing I have noticed and learned with this whole watchmaking malarkey is that you really need to try and take holes off the pins incredibly concentrically, or incredibly parallelly, I suppose you may say, because otherwise it simply won't go. Now, what we're removing there is the set lever, I believe you may call it, and that is what actually retains the main stem itself, and that there is the keyless works, or some barrel for it. Now, we are rapidly accelerating through the assembly of this watch, and what I'm struggling with here at the minute is the hour wheel. Now, one thing I always have problems with in my last videos is confusing seconds and the minutes wheel, but this is the hour wheel, and that comes off like that. That is not a press fit or anything, it just lifts off. And I've got a small intermediate drive gear, which we have removed to gain access to the crown pinion. Now, what I need to remove this cannon pinion, not crown pinion, depending on who you are. Most people call it a cannon pinion. Is a proper canyon pinion puller. Now, I don't have one of those, and they are only pressed fit, so with the judicious use of a bit of safety with the old tweezers, you can get that pulled up. And here you see I've got a new tool, it's a new clamp to hold the workings. And with that, I'm going to hold the works the other way up so I can gain access to this large screw to take off that counterbalance and see what's on the underneath of it. And there she goes. And there you can see the reason why she flew off. In there we've got 2 halves of a ratchet spring, which is quite a fascinating mechanism I'll show you a bit later on. And basically what that means is no matter which way you turn that counterbalance, you're going to be winding up that mainspring in one direction only, which is quite an interesting mechanism. I do like things like that. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to try and let down that mainspring. Now you see I'm turning that ratchet wheel, and that is the... No, it's gone. Unfortunately my screwdriver slipped off the dish there, but it's not the end of the world. No harm, no foul, as they say. So what I'm actually moving at there is a fantastic little piece of engineering. On a normal watch like this, you'd have a click and a click spring going on that main ratchet wheel. But in this, it's not the case. It's combined. It is a single item. So it is a large piece of, well, a long anyway, piece of spring steel, which actually clicks into that ratchet wheel and is the click and click spring all in once. I really like that. Before I go any further with the disassembly, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take off the balance wheel. Now, the balance wheel is of course attached to that balance wheel bridge, but I heard another term for it called the balance wheel cock, so someone will have to tell me which one it is. One of them makes me giggle, and one of them is what most people call it. I'll let you decide which is which. So with that out of the way, we can continue with the restoration. I always like to try and remove that early on because of that hairspring which is attached to it. So cool, because it's the width of a human hair, or it's very thin indeed anyway. It's very easy to break. It's very easy to damage, so the safest thing to do with it is just remove it all together. I don't mind that at all. So there we are. That's the old ratchet wheel thrown to one side, and then we're going to be going and taking off this main bridge, and then we're going to be gaining access to all the drive wheels underneath it. So as I mentioned, this is a automatic watch, and indeed it is. You've seen that now with the ratchet wheel and the counterbalance and what have you. But what I find very interesting about this particular watch is it's completely automatic only. There is no manual wind whatsoever, which means there's no crown wheel, for instance. There's no interface gearing, and that's it. It's just that's all it is. And as I continue removing the train of wheels, including the seconds hand there, I'm just going to go into a little bit about the Seiko 5. Now, the Seiko 5 is actually a sub-brand of Seiko, and I never realised this. First introduced in 1963 with the Seiko Sportsmatic, it's actually been turned from a model into a sub-brand. Now, Seiko 5, it relates to something, of course, but I'd never have thought this is what it is. I thought it would have been a model number or a release year or something like that, but it's not. The 5 is a reference to 5 attributes that any watch belonging should exhibit, which I think is very interesting. So these 5 attributes are an automatic watch movement, as indeed it has, the day and date displayed on the dial, which this one has, water acceptance to an acceptable degree, or water resistance to an acceptable degree, which this probably had, but to be honest with you, I believe this is probably why this watch has seen that damage, because of moisture. Things don't corrode without moisture like that. It's got to have a recessed crown at the 4 o'clock position, and it's got to have a durable case and bracelet, which it certainly has. Now, as with any rule, there are going to be outliers, and with this, apart from the water resistance, I think that the recessed crown is in the 3 o'clock position, not the 4 o'clock position, but apparently this is the most omitted of the 5 rules, let's say. They don't really mind what degree of clock it is, as long as it's recessed into the case, which this is. It does give a very nice, sleek look, to be honest with you. And now I've waffled about Seiko, I've actually disassembled the watch, and here we're taking the mainspring out of the barrel. Now, if you watched my last video, when I tried to do this, it pinged off into next week. But luckily, this one isn't the case. This is quite a difficult little mainspring to work with, to be honest with you. You look at it in there and you don't think there's all that much to it. But when you start taking it out, it quickly starts becoming a magician trying to pull scarves out of his pockets or something like that. It just doesn't ever seem to stop. So the 6309 movement and the 6309A movement, they come under the same caliber number, and as far as I can tell, they are interchangeable. The only thing which is confusing is that both of them have 17 joules in, whereas the face claims to be a 21 joule movement. So I think, if anything's happened, this has probably had a new face on it more than anything else, because the case and the movement both claim it to be a 6309. Makes you wonder why someone would put the other face on it, but there you go. There's all sorts of strange and wonderful people in the world. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to chuck the old balance wheel and the balance wheel bridge back on the main chassis of the watch there, just to prevent it getting damaged whilst I get it all cleaned. And there you can see that mainspring just at the bottom of the screen there. Quite a nice mainspring. It can give a 47-hour power reserve when it's well, when it was new anyway. And to be honest with you, obviously I'm narrating this video after the fact, and this watch does indeed just sit there ticking and ticking. It doesn't ever stop. And there you can see that is actually lovely and free. That balance wheel is there, just with a bit of a blast of air. You can see now, even now, it's still going. And that's exactly what I want to see in a balance wheel. If you get any dirt or grit on that, it can be quite difficult to get it going again. So that removal of the knife is, well, somewhat of a lead into what we're going to get on with here. I've got this proper case remover, and I never get on with these. I don't know what it is, if the ones I get are just low quality or what, but I can never get on. And what I'm trying to do here is remove the bezel, which is keeping the crystal inside. Obviously, it's acrylic, it's cracked, it needs to be new. I just simply cannot get in, and you know what? Even the knife's let me down today. But with a good old push from the rear, you can see through she comes, and there you can see that steel ring goes on the inside of the crystal to press it to the outside of the watch to improve the waterproofing. And you've also got, apart from a cracked crystal, a band of rubber all the way outside to aid with the waterproofing. I'm very lucky. This is an incredibly popular watch. You've still got all the spare parts for it, as I'm sure you're going to see a little bit later on. Now, I ran out of patience trying to do that from the outside, so what I did is I just went in on the inside very gently, and there was a gap, so I just pried it out with a screwdriver. Fantastic, the control you can get just on the rotation of a screwdriver tip. Just to go off topic somewhat, there was a gentleman in the 50s who had a nuclear core in front of him, and it had two berkelium electron focuses on the outside of it, or neutron focuses, I suppose. And he was controlling it with the tip of a screwdriver, and he'd open it and close it, and open it and close it, and they'd see how radioactive or non-radioactive it was. This is obviously before they knew how dangerous and stupid what he was doing was. Anyway, inevitable happens. It slipped off the screwdriver, it fell down, went supercritical, and unfortunately that was the end for our friend the scientist. But the point is that even in such a conversation as that, he had the control until he didn't. I do like the mechanical advantage you can get from a screwdriver, and here I am just trying to clean the parts up before they go in the ultrasonic cleaner, because it's a fantastic device, the ultrasonic cleaner, but it's never going to get all of that crud off of there. Never in the month of Sundays, and you can just see the state of my poor gel cushion from trying to clean on these. Now here you can see I want a proper watch cleaner, but you know it's just not going to happen. So what I do is I'll give them all a nice soaking in some 99% isopropyl alcohol so it doesn't attack the plastics. Now just look how clean that cleaning fluid is, because after 480 seconds I can promise you it isn't going to look like that. So obviously it's liquid, and that's 240 volt power, so I'm just unplugging it, and look at the state of that. Absolutely disgusting, but it does just show how good an ultrasonic cleaner is. For those of you who don't know, an ultrasonic cleaner, all it does is pulse ultrasonic sound into the medium, I suppose you've got there, and it reflects off of anything which is in there, which is causing micro bubbles called cavitations. Now when these bubbles form and then pop, it actually releases stuff off the surface, and it leaves lovely clean product like that. Look at it shiny. I could go to the effort of taking a polishing mop to all that and be able to see my face in it, but to be honest with you, I quite like the whole road worn thing which you can seem to get from that sort of stuff, so I think that's probably how I'm going to keep it. You can also see quite a fantastic dint in the back of that case. Now this bracelet here it's incredibly clean now, but it's also incredibly worn. And frankly, I've got plans with this watch. So my better half, God love her, her brother is 30 in a few weeks. In fact, when this video is released, he will have been 30 yesterday. I'm just going to cut myself off. What I'm putting in here is some Mobius braking grease. This is an automatic watch. The watches we've seen so far, they've got a little divot for it to lock into. So as you tighten it and tighten it up, it's just going to get tighter and tighter until it is indeed fully wound. With an automatic watch, that simply isn't the case. What you do is you wind it up and wind it up and wind it up, and it is held in place by the friction from this grease. When it reaches its preset torque, if you will, or tightness, whichever, it will slip, and then you'll be able to tighten it again. Obviously, it's an automatic watch, so eventually it's going to have to get a point where a clutch of some description kicks in, and in this case, we're doing it with this. All I'm going to do is I'm going to be loading the spring into that barrel in the same method I've done before. So as you saw me when I took it out, it's got a very thick part right on the end of the spring, and what that's doing is that's going to provide a lot of additional force on the inside of that barrel, just to try and stop it from rotating around quite as freely as it wants to. And you can see what I'm going to do is I'm going to struggle here for a little while and then insert it. What you can get for these mainsprings is you can get a little winding tool, which is effectively like a winder with a syringe. So you wind it up and up and up, and it gets real tight. You insert that into the watch, you push the plunger of the syringe part, it drops in, and it completely takes the space of it. And you know what? That'd probably be worth investing in. So back to my story. Yes. So you'd have been 30 yesterday when this is released. So happy birthday, baby boy! This is going to be going on your wrist, and yeah, I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be doing some work on it, and I'm also going to be getting some nice new bits to try and, well, give him something that he'd be proud to wear. Everyone likes a cool old Seiko, and a lot of people don't like watches in this day and age, but you know, it's just it's a nice thing to commemorate a proper birthday. And now you can see it, at least it's all been cleaned and it's all been lubricated. So I suppose one could hope that you know, it's going to go for a while anyway. And if it doesn't, just give it straight back to me. I've already had it apart once. I'll be able to do it in half the time. So with that, again, you can get a proper tool to close these. All you need to do is line it up and then lovely. And you can see that's it. Just clicks back in and you're good to go. And that is the mainspring, or the barrel, or the mainspring barrel, completely reassembled. So now we start with the reassembly of the watch. Now we're going in for the actual working side, the watch bit of it first. And we're going in with the main wheel in the centre, which is the hours wheel. And then what I'm going to do is go with this escapement wheel second. Now, I don't know if this was a coincidence or if it was design. Knowing Seiko as a brand, I don't think it can be coincidence. But I believe you're supposed to put the escapement wheel in first, and then the hour wheel second, and then of course we've got a lovely little bridge to go over the pair of these. And as you see, when we go with the intermediate wheel and then we go with the minute wheel, they have actually got 3 holes in and 4 holes in, and that's actually got 2 holes in. So I think it's almost saying, look, you know, you put the escapement wheel in first, that's got 2 holes, that's second. The other one's got 3 holes in, that's third. And there you go, so that one's going in third, and then we've got another one which goes in fourth. And I really hope that's the case, because that'd be incredibly satisfying, put it that way. So with these, it's really a case of getting them all lined up, because although you can't see it, there will be a jewel underneath at the bottom of that wheel for the pivot to go into. And what I've found helps is as you try and do them up, just give it a little bit of a spin every now and then to make sure the teeth are engaged. And of course, before we put the old minute wheel in, what we're going to do is I say minute wheel again, it's the seconds wheel, I know it is. I'm going to drop a little bit of a Mobius 9010 on there, and I'm also going to stick that main barrel back in just to make sure I can actually fit it, because this seconds wheel, thank you, goes on the top. And there you can see it with its 4 holes put in. And what I'm going to do now is just give this a little bit of a turn, just gently, just to make sure the teeth are all engaged. Because you need to make sure the teeth's engaged, otherwise you've got no hope of fitting this next component, the bridge for all of these. Now these can be a little bit of a bugger indeed, and this is where your patience testing comes in. And quite curiously about this, you'll notice the amount of jewels it does have over the older seconds pivot there, and that intermediate pivot is just a through hole through a bit of steel. They chose to not put a jewel on that. I don't know why. But with that bridge fitted, I'm just going to give everything a little bit of a lubricate before I have to move on. So I'm lubricating this barrel bridge now because the ratchet wheel is going to cover it. And there we go. So I put some down between the steel components, and now I'm putting the ratchet wheel on top just to try and remove the friction as it winds. Now I'm using a little bit of HP 500 for this, and you can see now with it sprung loaded, and that is the click and spring all in one engaging on it. You can see as I wind that ratchet, the barrel is going to wind off underneath it, and you can see it's still going to wind, and it's not stopping winding because as it stands this pallet fork isn't in. So that main spring is so called, that is where the power for the watch comes from, and it goes through all these wheels, all this train of wheels down to this pallet fork, and this is the actual brains behind the operation. So as it moves from one side to the other, and it ticks and it tocks, as indeed as the sound an old one makes, it'll allow enough movement on a prerequisite time, and fully enough, that was going to equate to or be some multiple of a second. So this particular movement is going to run, I think it's around 21,000 a minute. Sorry, 21,600 beats per hour this is going to do. So I'm sure if you divide that by 360, you'd be able to figure out exactly how many times it does it in a second. I'm not going to do that for you because, frankly, I'm lazy. But you can see with that pallet fork in, we can now get some wind on that ratchet wheel going against that mainspring, that click spring, sorry, and the mainspring underneath it is not moving. And now what it means is I should be able to move, and you see that's now got tension on it, and that's going to click back and forth of its own accord. And with that, it's now the interesting time to see if our cleaning has worked and if we now have a watch rather than a paperweight. So what I found with the balance wheel is get it in the old bottom jewel first, give it a spin round, and now got to line it up on these posts, and hopefully it all lines up, and it might drop into life, but now's the interesting bit because you don't know, and it's all moving, and it's just, and, oh, not quite. And it might do, you might just have to get it going, and and it'll tease you. And it's, oh, I've moved it now, so it's never going to run now. And what I've found sometimes you need to do is you need to give it a run, maybe put a little bit of more wind in it. Sometimes it's got a little bit of dirt until I've cleaned it. So what I'll do is I'll just get the spring, and it bursts into life of its own accord. It's just stood there watching me, but that's fantastically exciting, watching it run for the first time. And I appreciate it's not running very well at the moment, but nothing is lubricated yet. It's all been cleaned, but it's all going to be dry. There's not a single drop of oil within it. And most importantly, those jewels for the shock settings for those, you see underneath there at the centre of the old balance wheel, those haven't been cleaned or lubricated. So that could be full of dirt or any old rubbish. But you can see already how much better and better it's getting just by time passing and having that bit of wind in it. And now you can see it's ticking like an absolute kipper. Ticking like my old mate's BMW, we didn't put an oil in at that time. So as mentioned, we're going to give it some lubrication. It really is running quite well now. So we're going to be going in with a bit of Mobius 9010 again. Now, I wasn't sure how to lubricate these. The jewels I knew, that was quite obvious. But those parts above, obviously are steel on steel, so I thought it'd be best to go for a bit of a higher viscosity solution. So I went with the HP 500 oil here rather than the Mobius 9010. If you don't think this is the right thing to do, then please do let me know. I am just some guy having a play here. I'm certainly not an expert on the field. But you can see I'm trying my best to get it to come off this oiler. And I don't know why, but it just doesn't want to know it. And then all of a sudden, it's all going to come off at once and completely fill that cup. And that really isn't what you want. That is far too much oil. As indeed you see, I'm going to remove it with a bit of Rodico here. You want a very, very small amount. In reality, it's probably better to under-oil one of these watches than to over-oil it. Because you over-oil it, you know, it'll run adequately for a small amount of time, but then the oil will attract dirt, it'll attract, you know, mist out of the air, all that sort of rubbish. And eventually, if it gets too hot, it'll evaporate and it'll be all over the watch, and it's just not what you want. And again, I've probably put a bit too much in that as well, but I do actually go back and clean that off. And now is the one I always forget about. It's the jewel for the old pallet fork, which I know I'm going to get to, but first I am just going to go in with the Rodico, and there you go. Just take off the excess. I will get better at that, but this is why we're here. We're all here to learn. Or I certainly am anyway. So you can see I'm effectively going to hack the watch, just so I can gain access to that. Because in the last video I tried to just stab through the gap, and of course it'd never work. Now I use the phrase "hack the watch" here. That's in reference to a hacking movement. Hacking movement is one there when you pull out the crown, pull out the stem to change the time. It actually stops a second hand as well, which is one of the watches I want next. And now we've got one of these Seiko shock settings, and you can't tell, this is incredibly small. This is the first one of these I've ever done. And frankly, I was cacking it, because the ones on the rotary I did in the last episode, the Inca block, they're great, because you know they're not going to go anywhere. And this, you see, I've put pressure on the jewel, and it's disappeared. It's just completely vanished. And I don't want to say how long I looked for that for. I looked for about 40 minutes all over the floor, and it turns out it was actually on top of the watch, and I couldn't see the wood through the trees. But with the removal of the actual spring, you can remove the shock setting itself, which come in 2 halves. So I've removed the jewel, and now I'm just trying to get a drop of oil to stick to it. Again, I'm not perfect at these, but this is literally the 3rd one I've done in my time of watchmaking, if you will. And then what you can do is you can introduce the bottom side of the shock setting to the top, and that'll be held in there by the surface tension of that drop of oil that I've just put on, and it'll effectively become one piece again. Like I say, just drop that on there, make sure it's all lined up, and there you go, it's good to go. And that should just about drop in there if you don't jam it. You can see I've moved that bloody jewel, and no matter what I do, I just cannot do these, but I can't quite express how small and finicky these are. So I know it's got some oil on it. I don't want to, but at this point, I'm going to bow to working within one skill set. I'm always one for pushing envelopes and trying new things, as indeed I do, and I did. But this has got special motivation behind this watch, so the last thing I want to do is knacker it. So there we go. And it's one of those, you do what you're capable of until you're comfortable, and then you start taking on new stuff. At this point, there's so much new stuff to be learning here, especially with how to keep watch parts from flying off like that. There's so much new stuff to be learning here that if you take on too much, you're just going to make a botch of everything, which I'm not really interested in doing. So here you see what you've got to do is you've got to get one side of it underneath there, and then you've got to start slowly rotating it. So you can see I've actually stopped the balance wheel at the moment. It's because I've put a small amount of tension on that jewel, which obviously then going to press on the old balance staff, unfortunately. You see, you remove it in, and then I'll get everything aligned. I'll get that jewel put back in as it should, and then I'll know not to not to try and work out my means in the future. I'm lying. I enjoy it, and all's well that ends well. Just to drop some spoilers, it does indeed start working again. And there you go. So I'll drop that in there, and I'll give it a bit of a turn, and then that's all in. And just get it all realigned again, and then just give it a bit of a give it a bit of a kickstart, and it'll start off pretty slowly. Then after a small amount of time, it'll find its home once more, and it'll be all happy and good to go, and it'll be running nice and happy again. So back with the continuation of the rebuild of this watch. We're going to be dropping some 9010 in there, and then we've got this nice intermediate wheel here, which is incredibly fine-toothed. And what this is going to be doing is attaching to the self-winding mechanism for this watch, as I'd mentioned before. So we're going to drop this hole back in. You can see I had a cog on the underside, which will effectively enact on that main ratchet wheel. And I'm going to keep it zoomed in as I drop the bridge on. There's not a whole lot to align on this bridge, to be honest with you, so it's not too bad. All you got to do is really drop on the post. But you can see these teeth here have effectively landed on the top of that wheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some tension on it just with my finger, and I'm just going to move these to either side just to make sure they're not pinched or snagged and make sure they can operate properly. Now you've got this little hole there, and now you've got a hole on the other side, and you've got the slot up the top as well. So just by poking and prodding around, we're just going to make sure that that's all aligned properly, as indeed it should be. And you can see now that that tooth is on the ratchet there. That lifts off, spot on. And the same thing on the other side. Also, you might not be able to see this ever so well. It was quite difficult to film this. Oh no, you can see it okay. There you go, so that's lifting off. And spot on also. And now, all one's got to do is put the screws in. And that's the automatic side works done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to wind it. And now you can see at the top that no matter which way you spin this, just look at that ratchet wheel clicking over the teeth of that ratchet. No matter which way you spin that, is going to put wind into the watch the correct way, which is excellent, really. If you knew electronics, it's the difference between half wave and full wave rectification. That's a diode versus a bridge rectifier for the multi-vane hobbyists out there. So I've taken the liberty of cleaning up that counterweight somewhat. I've got off all that horrible corrosion, and I've even given it the old once over to see if there's anything I can do with it. Now I could have replated it if I had the capacity. Unfortunately, I don't. But now there you go. There's just an action shot of that ratchet wheel going again with that click spring assembly. And now back on the other side. First things first. With this, we are going to drop that barrel for the keyless works back in. And what I'm going to do here is also chuck the stem through, just to keep that in situ while we assemble it. Now the phrase keyless works I find is fascinating. In the same way, it is a life sentence when you go to prison. It is not a life sentence as in your life. It is a life sentence as opposed to the death sentence. And it is just one of those residual phrases which is stuck around and no one questions too much until you question it and go, hang about, yeah, why is that? And that's one of those. And this is the keyless works, and it is the keyless works as opposed to the keyed works which you would get in an old style pocket watch. Now, an old style pocket watch, you'd actually wind up with a specific winding key. Now, obviously, most wristwatches don't have a key. Most pocket watches don't have a key neither. And that's because they rely on these keyless works. And all it means is you're able to wind it through the stem there instead of using a key, which is an excellent bit of trivia. I do like a bit of trivia. So because this is a very high friction area, the keyless works, and all the rest of it as we're going to see, and we're going to be going in with some synthetic grease. And that's very, like I say, high pressure areas. And now I'm going to be going back in with this yoke spring combination. You've got to make sure it's all lined up on there and make sure it's got somewhere to fall into and that you're pressing it nice and parallel and it's all lined up and in the hole. And this is a hobby you've got to want to do. You can't be half bothered. So when that's all aligned, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat and I'm going to put some pressure down on that yoke, and then we're going to push that spring down separately to make sure it falls in. Just makes your life easy doing it like that. So there you go, that's going to retain that barrel there. And now we can move on to this next component. Again, this gives the index for the 3 positions for that stem. So obviously all the way in, the intermediate, which can do the day of the month, day of the week, and all the way out, which sets the time. Now, that section on the right as well, what that's going to do is that's going to keep the old set lever in. So on another style watch, as I mentioned before, you'd have a screw which you'd undo, which removes that set lever, which is the part of the top which allows the old stem to be pulled out. And with the proper works like this, what you've got is you've got a pin detent, which you saw me press for a start, and that spring is what fires against that setting lever. And now you can see I'm just testing all the positions, and again, because this is a high friction component, I'm going to hit that with some grease just down the inside, and that's a nice synthetic grease, and you can see that's clicked to all 3 positions. I just want to make sure it's not running dry, that's all. So Seiko has a bit of a overview. They are quite a fantastic company, and a lot of people don't give them credit for that. I think they're mostly remembered for those quartz watches they did in the 80s. Indeed, they're one of the first quartz watch manufacturers, so it's understandable as to why they'd be known like that. But they've actually been running for years and years. They were actually founded in 1881 back in Japan. But Seiko have got quite a staggering brand. They do the quartz watches down to like 20, 30 quid, something like that, all the way up to high-end Seikos, up to into the thousands. And they do the dive watches in the intermediate, and it's all good, high-quality stuff. Again, I can't control my oil. But they are one of 2 companies alongside Rolex, which is considered to be vertically integrated. And what they mean by this is they do everything themselves. So they've got their own design house, they manufacture it all, they make it all, they assemble it all, they just inspect and ship them all from one factory, and it is only them and Rolex which do this. And I mean, a lot of people, you say watch, you hear Rolex, and these guys are on the same vein as them, so they've got to be worth a lot more credit than they get. And you know, I like a workhorse. I like a watch that you can stick on your wrist and, you know, not be too bashful about giving it a bump and a knacker, because quite frankly I'm a bit of a clumsy person. But yeah, I think old Seiko should be given a little bit more credit than they are. And you know what, this has actually been a joy to work on. They say it's the one way to tell a high quality mechanism is by taking it apart and putting it back together. And if it's easy to do, then you know it's high quality, because it's been designed for this to happen to it. It's been designed to be worked on, designed to be stripped, cleaned, assembled, and serviced as it is. And it's also been designed to have some fool from Lincolnshire living in Scotland to put too much oil absolutely everywhere. And you know what, I actually like that one so much, I'm noticing in post I'm actually going to oil it twice, apparently, because why not? And again, I'm not going to clean these with Rodico, because they're going to come off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that screw in first and then clean Rodico, and now you can see how these 3 positions works. Look at that, look, you spin it one way, it does the day of the, and then you do it the other way, and it's the day of the month. And one way is day of the week, the other way is day of the month. And all the way out it does the time. So what I'm doing here is I'm making sure all the old wheels are aligned, and then I'm going to stick that cannon pinion down. And now we've got the hour wheel as well, and now you notice an issue. I've put it together out of sequence. So yep, that's got to come off. That small bridging component's got to be undone quite begrudgingly. Luckily I don't have to take it all the way off. You see, I'm just gonna flicker out of the way a little bit, just enough to get me some room to have that hour wheel back on. I am still learning. I am some guy playing about basically, and thoroughly enjoying it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that actually spins now, and it's a good job I checked, because it didn't do, so it must not have been fully home. So now that we know it spins, I'm going to get that, drop the line back up, and I can tell you I'm not going to oil it for a 3rd time. So now it's back together. I'm just going to give it a quick test back and forth, just to make sure things spin, and you can see that it does indeed spin freely there. So now we've got these lovely plastic parts to put on. Now, in reality, I probably should have put that in first, but luckily, just by tipping up, I can give it some spin, and it'll go. Now, I'm struggling quite a lot with this this clamp at the moment. I suppose I'm just not used to it. And you can see I'm just spinning that back and forth. And obviously, there's a intermediate wheel missing, which is this little blighted down here. Now, what I was actually doing there was making sure that that's correct. I don't know if you could see on that wheel, but there's actually two sets of teeth on it. So there's a big set of teeth on the outside, and then on a second tier, a little bit further in, there's a second set of teeth. And that little sprocket there sets the mesh between that center wheel, which is obviously the hours wheel, and those date works. And that's well, that's just it's a lovely mechanism that spins one way and one the other, which we'll demonstrate higher at the end. Now a little bit of education from the last video I did, where I had that rotary with the date wheel on it, and it was Friction City. So we've got a lovely little channel for that date wheel to run on. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it with some lubrication, some HP 500, just to make sure that date wheel is going to spin round nice and freely. Now I don't know if that picks up. It looks like I'm putting down quite a lot, but I can promise you I really am just scraping it across that surface. I'm really not putting on very much at all. And you see I put on quite a lot there. I actually spread it around like Billy and try and remove it. And like I say, the sort of ethos when you're lubricating a watch is to try and put on as little as possible while still getting the job done, for all the reasons mentioned before. So now that date wheel can go on. I say date wheel, it's the day of the month wheel, can go on. And that's it was running lovely on there. It's a very, very fine channel for it to run on. And that's now home. So with the date wheel on, and it's obviously running on that way, I can get the old get the click for it put on. I'm calling it a click because I haven't got another word, but of course what it's actually going to do is just give it a index to fall into to make sure it lines up, basically. So I'm going to use the same trick here as I used earlier, whereas I'm going to give downward pressure with one set of tweezers and then put the spring in for it to fall against, and you see instantly it click that day of the month wheel back into an index rather than just have it floating anyhow. And what I'm doing is with a very, very light touch of a HP 500 oil, I'm just going to kiss it across the nose of that spring there, or that click spring. And then we've got this cover plate to go on with that central spring. You can see that's not quite right because it's supposed to cover that shock setting, so it needs to go around a set of holes basically. And that spring which comes out, looks like a lollipop stuck on it, doesn't it? That is going to give the same indexing effect to the day of the week wheel on the inside. So where we put that first click spring on, which does the day of the month, that one does the day of the week. So with those two on, we've got this final cover plate to go on, and now you can see that is the teeth of that day of the month wheel completely covered, which will retain it in and prevent it from going anywhere basically. So we get all those lined up, and there you go, it drops onto the pins, and now we've simply got 3-4 screws to put in, just like that. That's the old girl done. And now we've got the last piece to put on for the watch works. This was a little bit of a pig to put on, to be honest with you. It took a couple of sit-ins and a bit of patience. What I found helps is if you just use both fingers and sort of move it back and forth. But there you go. And look at that action now. Look, spin it one way and it moves the day of the week. Spin it the other way and it does the day of the month. That's an excellent feature. And there you can see that's how it's going to change by changing the hours. I was spinning it there to obviously rapidly advance time. And it really is just as simple as that. And now I know it's all running, I can get that C-clip and I can very carefully just click that back down. And it's got a nice little groove running. It's just a C-clip, similar to a circlip. And it's just going to run on that shaft, and there you go. And now I'm just going to keep spinning it backwards to make sure I've not put too much tension on. And it's going to advance one day of the month and 2 days of the week, obviously for the 2 languages. Look at that look. So here we are moving over to the face, and this face makes me nervous just because of how filthy it is. And again, all I'm hitting it with is a very, very small amount of water. I wanted to try and basically tidy up the loom which is on the end of the hours there, and unfortunately I quite simply couldn't do. It just did not want to come off, didn't want to move. And it's all about working within your skill set until you learn a bit more, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm just really trying to make sure I'm cleaning up what can be cleaned without going too far. If you recall from my last video, the minute indicators had already come off, and you can see on the top and center there, those ones have come off, and I haven't even gone at them yet. So quite what they used to print these minute indicators and stuff on these old watches of this era, I don't know, but yeah, it's certainly not sticking around for the long term anyway. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with some Rodico finally, just to make sure that I can get the face of it as much as possible. And then this is going to click back over there. I've already attached it to the disc, and that is going to show just the day of the month and the day of the week. Now, quite frustratingly, I wanted to be a bit kind here, because the better half's brother, he's actually a southpaw, he's left-handed. So what I wanted to do is, when I had the face removed, put it on 180 degrees out of phase, and effectively put the winder stem onto the other side of the watch, because then it'd effectively have made it a left-hand watch. Now I thought it would have been a very nice thing to do. Unfortunately, that simply wouldn't work, because I don't quite know how, but where it says Friday 22, they're all queued up and in a line. When you put that through 180 degrees, for some reasons, none of it aligns. So it's very clear it's been designed to work like that. And, you know, it's one of those things. It'd have been nice, but unfortunately, it's just not destined to be. So what I'm doing here is effectively what I did in the last video incorrectly. So clearly I didn't learn. I did think about it, but it was just too late. And what I'm doing is I'm queuing up the minute hand and the hour hand and just pushing those over and pushing them down. And then what I should be able to do is pull that stem out and wind it around. And I should be able to see it click over at the right time. Now, I did set this first. I did move it just past midnight and then put the hands on as indeed you're supposed to. But it's such a long movement to move these over, I set it to the end rather than the start. So because the day of the month and the day of the week change over in the space of, well, over 3 hours, when it would finally finish changing over at midnight, it means it was actually starting to change over at 9 o'clock at night. And frankly, that was irritating to me. I really didn't like that at all. So I've moved it so, theoretically speaking, it shouldn't start changing what day it's showing until I'd hope around about midnight, because let's be real, more often than not, you're going to be in bed, you know, before midnight. You can keep that there as a nice little treat for the days when you're not. So again, one of my pet peeves is making sure the hands are thoroughly aligned. That's what got me into watches on my old Amiga automatic. So now you can see I've done a little bit later. I think it starts around about 11, half 11 now. So I might have liked it just that little bit later, but we'll see. So I'm going to keep coming round, and yeah, there you go. So around about 11, and it's finishing at about 12. Like I say, it's a little bit of a pain. I might have liked it just that little bit close to midnight, and I suppose there's still time to change it yet if I choose to. But it's you know, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So what we'll do is we'll set it to the correct time, and then we'll finish off by putting the old seconds hand on here. And this is a very, very chintzy seconds hand. I like this watch. I like it quite a lot because it's not a precision instrument. Now, of course, it is a precise instrument. It keeps time extremely well, you know. It'll, I think from the factory, it was like plus 10, minus 20 seconds out of the day sort of thing, which is, for a mass-produced watch, that was about 80 quid when it was new. That's not bad. But now look at the big hands on it, the big minute hand and the big hour hand, which doesn't reach all the way down to the hours. You know, it really is designed to be nice, and it's designed to be a watch. It's not like my Speedmaster or something where everything's accurate and it's all got full segmentation. It's a sports watch which is trying to be a little bit dressy as well, I suppose you may say. But I'm quite a fan of this little watch. There's a lovely little caliber inside as well, the 6309. So finally, let's deal with this horrible old crystal. So historically, I've just polished them up. this time, oh yeah, we're getting a brand new one. Look at the difference in that. That is absolutely gorgeous. And that is even a brand new seal to go on the outside of the crystal as well, because the old one fell to bits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that expansion ring down at the bottom. You can see that's that there. So that's going to put some pressure on the outside. Sorry, it's going to put some pressure on the crystal, forcing it to the outside wall. And then you put the O-ring over the top. It doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. What it does mean, though, is when you put this bezel back on, it's going to create a waterproof seal. And you can see me rotating it because, although I didn't show you, on that bezel there is actually a flat spot designed to get a knife or something or a pry tool in there to pry it up. And just look at the difference that's made. Now, I never thought they'd make that great of a difference, but I am thoroughly impressed by the difference that's made. This is when we go from a caliber and a watch case to, well, a watch. So, because it's a nice watch, you can press that spring detent, take the old stem out, give it one final blowout, and then the good thing about this particular watch caliber is it just drops inside there, no screws, no meshing about, just that plastic framework. So make sure it's all aligned, then we can just chuck the old stem in. One thing I do wish I was able to do, I wish I had a watch time graph so I can see how good my work is and how accurate it is. But there you go, look at that. Just dropped in, and that crown and stem is now completely hidden, as indeed is one of the 5 pillars of the Seiko 5. Just give it one final clean up. I do have some polywatch, but you know, it wasn't scuffed per se. It was just a little bit of a oil or grease, I suppose it was. And finally is to drop this case back on there. Now the seals did actually come as a kit, but I didn't show as this one getting changed, which I probably should have done. But what I'll do is I'll put that on there. We can get our rubber ball, and that's now tight. That is now a watch. And look at that. Just making sure that all the hand positions work. I was doing a fantastic job of not actually showing you. And that's exactly what I'm doing. But at least it shows off the loom, I suppose. And there we go. And that's now gone into the intermediate position. I'm just going to give that a good old spin just to make sure everything's working. Yeah, it should be, but I'm one of these people that if something's going to go wrong, I'd like it to go wrong on my account rather than somebody else's. So it is good to be able to rapidly click through the days of the month and the days of the week. And there you go. And that's when this watch was finished on Thursday the 23rd at around about 5:45 in the evening. Look at that. Let's have some nice close-up shots. So there's absolutely no way I could have returned it on that old bracelet. So there you go, it's a brand new, vintage looking strap. Nice quick release number. It's very nice, very comfortable on the wrist. And I hope it's going to suit its intended wear very well. So there you go, baby boy. Happy birthday. And for everyone else, I really hope you've enjoyed watching this. So thank you very much. I'll catch you on the next one.